It was a Tuesday night in January, and the temperature in Millhaven had dropped to 22 degrees. Rain had been turning the alleyways behind the old Drexton textile block into sheets of black ice since sundown. Leo was exactly where he had been for 3 weeks, beneath a canvas tarp stretched between 2 rusted loading dock pipes, a wool blanket that smelled like motor oil pulled up to his chin, a Jack London paperback open on his chest. He wasn't sleeping. He never slept deeply out here. He had learned to stay at the surface, one layer below consciousness, alert to anything that didn't fit the rhythm of the night. And what he heard at 11:43 did not fit at all. It was an engine, a V-twin chopper running rough, misfiring on one cylinder, dragging through the alley like something badly wounded trying to reach somewhere safe before it gave out entirely. Leo pulled back the edge of his tarp. The bike rolled into the thin cone of a dying street lamp, and then went over. The man on it didn't clear it in time. He went down hard, his arm taking the weight of the machine against the wet asphalt, and he lay completely still for 3 full seconds. Then he moved, slow, deliberate, mechanical, pushed the bike off himself with one arm, and dragged himself to one knee. His leather vest read Iron Vanguard MC on the top rocker and Sergeant at Arms on the bottom. His name patch said JX, and the left side of his torso, from his ribs to his hip, was soaked through with something that wasn't rain. Leo was across the alley before he made a conscious decision to move. He crouched beside the man. Jax looked up at him with eyes that were sharp and precise even through the pain. The eyes of someone who had spent a long time in situations where losing focus meant dying. He said nothing for 2 full seconds. And then, from the far end of Drexton Street, a police siren split the night open. Then another, then a third, closing fast. Jax's hand closed around Leo's forearm like a vice. One finger pressed to his lips. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Don't let them find me here, kid." Leo looked at the sirens. He looked at the man. He said, "Can you walk?" Jax said, "Don't have a choice." Leo said, "Then come on." He pulled a 6'4", 230-pound bleeding man across a frozen alley, through a busted side panel in the textile factory wall, and down 14 concrete steps into the basement storage room he used on the coldest nights. He dropped the steel bar lock across the door brackets. 30 seconds later, a police searchlight swept directly across the ground-level window pane, flooding the basement with white light for a long, breathless moment. Neither of them moved. The light passed. Leo let out a slow exhale, and the night that would change everything truly began. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now let's get back to Leo and what he was really made of. Here is what you need to understand about Leo before this story goes any further, because it is everything. Leo Briggs was not a troubled kid. He was not a runaway, not a delinquent, not a cautionary tale. He was the direct, quiet result of what happens when an economy collapses and a community stops bothering to count its casualties. His father had worked the Drexton Mill for 18 years. The mill closed. His father developed a pulmonary condition his doctor linked almost certainly to decades of asbestos exposure and died 2 years later at 44 years old. His mother lasted 14 months after that before a stroke took her on a February morning. Leo was 17. No aunts, no uncles, no family friends who stepped up. A caseworker visited twice, filed 2 forms, and transferred counties. Leo had aged out of every system designed to catch him and done it without a single arrest, without a single act of theft, without surrendering the quiet, stubborn dignity that absolutely nobody in Millhaven had ever taken the time to notice. He did odd jobs. He read everything he could find, and he survived, which is a more remarkable thing than this town ever gave him credit for. The Iron Vanguard Motorcycle Club had operated out of central Pennsylvania for over 30 years. They were not looking for trouble. They were also not the kind of men who stepped aside when trouble came looking for someone weaker than itself. Their founding charter contained 3 lines every prospect memorized on his first night. You protect what is yours. You honor what you owe. You never, under any circumstance, abandon a brother. Jax Calloway had been sergeant at arms for 11 years. 2 tours in Fallujah before that, a shrapnel scar across his left forearm, and a precise, deeply held contempt for institutions that abuse the authority given to them. He was 41 years old. He had never, in 11 years, been ambushed. Until tonight. The reason Jax was riding alone and bleeding through a Rust Belt alley at midnight came down to one name: Chief Roy Garrett. 9 years in office. 7 of those years quietly accepting cash from a Philadelphia land development firm called Crestfield Holdings, which wanted to acquire the derelict east side of Millhaven and convert it into luxury residential real estate. The problem was that the east side wasn't empty. It had residents, not wealthy ones, but real ones. Community centers, a veterans outreach clinic, families maintaining properties for decades without formal title. Garrett's arrangement was to use selective enforcement, fabricated code violations, and raw intimidation to pressure those people out. The Iron Vanguard's chapter house sat on a piece of land Crestfield wanted badly, and Jax had spent 6 months quietly assembling the evidence to prove it. Financial records, wire transfers, signed correspondence, and a recorded phone call between Garrett and Crestfield's regional director that was, by itself, enough to end careers and open federal cases. Garrett knew Jax had those files. 3 nights ago, he decided the cleanest solution was to make sure they were never delivered. Inside the cold basement, Leo worked by the light of a small camp lantern. He boiled rainwater in a tin pot, tore clean strips from a spare shirt, and pressed them against the wound with steady, even pressure. The bullet had passed through the tissue above Jax's left hip. No bone, no organ, which was the only reason Jax was still upright and conscious. It was still serious. Serious enough that a lesser man would have gone under an hour ago. Jax sat with his back against the wall and watched the kid work without saying a word. Leo did not ask who shot him, did not ask about the club or the cops or what any of it meant. He just worked, calm, focused, methodical. After 20 minutes, the bleeding had slowed to a manageable seep. Jax finally said, "You got a name?" Leo said, "Leo." Jax said, "You live down here, Leo." Leo said, "When it gets cold." Jax said nothing to that for a long time, but his eyes stayed on the kid, measuring something. Above them, Roy Garrett had deployed 6 deputies in 2 squad cars, and they were running a systematic sweep of the east side block by block. Garrett knew Jax was hit. He had confirmation from the shooter, a man he had paid $3,000 to intercept Jax on the edge of the factory district as he rode out with the files. What Garrett did not know was whether those files had already been transmitted electronically or whether they were still physically on Jax. He needed the answer. And he needed Jax silent before the sun came up. His deputies swept the alleyways with flashlights, kicked open unsecured doors, and interrogated anyone still on the street. The ground floor windows of the textile factory shuddered with the weight of boots moving directly overhead. And then Jax told Leo the part of the story that hurt worse than the bullet. He told him about Cole Rafferty, 26 years old, 2 years as a club prospect, quiet and ambitious and apparently, privately, resentful enough of the club's leadership to make a decision that no man operating under any real code of honor ever comes back from. Cole had gone to Garrett. He had told him exactly when Jax would be riding out alone, exactly which road he would take, exactly where the files would be on his person. In exchange, Garrett had promised him a position of local influence once the club's land was seized and their chapter house was shut down. Cole had sold his brothers for a corrupt man's promise and a piece of stolen ground. Leo sat with that for a moment in the dark. He didn't say much. He understood the specific weight of being betrayed by someone you had trusted, not from a motorcycle club, but from the accumulated experience of a life where the people who were supposed to show up consistently had not. He looked at Jax and said, "What do you need from me?" Jax said, "Nothing. You've done more than enough already." But Leo heard what was underneath that, and he was already thinking. The boots came down the exterior stairwell. 3 sets. Flashlight beams sliced through the gap under the basement door. Garrett's voice carried through the wall, ordering his men to check every locked entry point in the perimeter. Jax could not run. Leo looked at him, and then at the crawl passage under the factory's east wall, and made the second decision of the night. He squeezed through the passage into the east corridor, picked up a rusted pipe fitting from the floor, and threw it hard through the window at the far end of the building. The glass exploded into the night. He heard the deputies shout and redirect. He walked toward their flashlight beams with his hands already raised. Garrett's men had Leo's collar in 40 seconds. They dragged him into the street where Garrett stood under a sodium lamp in his wool coat and chief's cap, watching Leo the way a man watches something he hasn't decided the value of yet. He was broad-chested, late 50s, carrying the particular brand of confidence that comes not from competence, but from years of power that nobody had ever seriously challenged. He looked Leo up and down. He said, "Anybody in that building with you tonight?" Leo looked him dead in the eye and said, "No." Garrett stepped closer. He said, very quietly, "A homeless kid in this town has no friends, no lawyers, no paperwork, nothing protecting you. You tell me what I need to know, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. You don't, and I will put you in the state system so deep that nobody finds you for 2 years." He let that land. Then he said, "Was there anyone in that building with you tonight?" Leo said nothing. Garrett held the silence for 5 full seconds. Then he nodded to his deputies. "Book him." Chief Garrett threw a helpless kid into a cold cell just for refusing to betray a man he barely knew. He was counting on Leo having no one, and he was almost right. Here is what I want to ask you directly. If you were in that cell, alone, with no resources and no backup, facing 2 years in the state system, would you have kept your mouth shut? Would you have protected a stranger? Leave your answer in the comments below, because I think this question says something real about who people are when there is genuinely nothing in it for them. Leo sat in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and rust, and stared at a hairline crack in the cinder block wall. Garrett came back at 6 in the morning with transport paperwork and told Leo that if he hadn't given a statement by 9, he would be processed into the county system by noon. Leo sat on the metal bench with his hands in his lap and said absolutely nothing. Garrett left, and 23 miles away, on back roads, Jax was already moving. The utility truck from the factory yard had gotten him to the Iron Vanguard safe house outside Granger Township. where 3 of the club's most senior and loyal members were waiting. Jack sat down. He handed over the USB drive, and then he told them about Leo, the 19-year-old kid with nothing who had hidden him, patched his wound, drawn the deputies away, and was now sitting in Garrett's jail on charges that existed purely to punish him for having a conscience. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the national president of the Iron Vanguard, who had driven 4 hours through the night to be there, said, "Make the calls." The phone started ringing. All of them. At 8:47 in the morning, Roy Garrett's desk phone rang. It was the office of the Pennsylvania State Attorney General. 2 federal investigators and a state prosecutor were in the parking lot. He was advised to remain in his office. He was advised not to destroy any documents. He walked to his window, and what he saw stopped him completely. The ground was already vibrating. You felt it before you heard it, a deep rolling tremor climbing through the floor and up through your chest. And then the sound arrived, filling Main Street like a tide coming in. 100 motorcycles, custom choppers and road bikes running Iron Vanguard colors from 5 regional chapters, rolling in a slow, perfectly ordered column that stopped in a formation filling the entire block in front of the Millhaven Police Precinct. At the front, fully bandaged, riding straight-backed, was Jax. Beside him, the national president. Behind them, stepping out of 2 black SUVs, federal agents in field jackets, and a woman in a charcoal suit from the state attorney general's office. Jax had transmitted encrypted copies of every single file to 3 separate legal contacts the night before the ambush. A contingency he had built weeks earlier because he knew what Garrett was willing to do. The physical drive was confirmation. The case was already built. For years of financial records, wire transfers, signed contracts, and 1 recorded phone call between Garrett and Crestfield's regional director that left absolutely no room for interpretation. It was over before Garrett ever made it to his window. Cole Rafferty had already been dealt with. The club's leadership had handled it in the hours before dawn. No violence, no spectacle, just the full, documented account of what he had done laid out in front of every senior member. His patch was cut from his vest. His colors were taken from his hands. He was told, without ceremony, that he was nothing under this club's name anymore. Not a prospect, not a member, not protected, not recognized. He was handed over to the federal investigators along with a complete account of his communications with Garrett. The corrupt cop he had trusted to take care of him had no use for him now. He faced what he had chosen entirely alone. Roy Garrett was walked out of the Millhaven Police Precinct at 9:15 in the morning. Badge surrendered on his own desk. Hands cuffed on the front steps of the building he had used as a personal instrument of corruption for 7 years. The town watched. Store owners stood at their windows. People who had absorbed years of intimidation and selective enforcement stood on the sidewalk in the cold morning air and watched it happen in absolute silence. Garrett's face, for the first time that anyone in this town had ever witnessed, had nothing behind it. Leo was released at 9:22. All charges erased. A deputy he had never seen before walked him to the front entrance without a word and unlocked the door. Leo stepped out into the cold January morning and stood at the top of the precinct steps. He looked at the column of motorcycles filling Main Street. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the sky, which was pale and gray and entirely indifferent, the way Pennsylvania winter skies always are. He was 19 years old, no coat, no wallet, nowhere to be, and he had no idea what came next. Jax walked up the steps to him slowly, favoring his left side. He didn't make a speech. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a black leather jacket. heavy, broken in, with the iron Vanguard patch on the back. He held it out. Leo looked at it. He said, "I'm not in your club." Jack said no. "But you rode with us last night, whether you knew it or not." Leo took the jacket. Then Jax pointed down the steps to 1978 Shovelhead chopper, fully restored, sitting at the edge of the column in the morning light. He said, "She runs clean. You know how to ride?" Leo said, "I can learn." Jax almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that the men who had ridden with him for a decade would have recognized it. He said, "Yeah, kid, I know you can." Leo Briggs rode out of Mill Haven, Pennsylvania, that morning flanked by 100 motorcycles. The town that had treated him like a crack in the sidewalk watched him go. The factories that had taken his father stood cold and silent in the mirror. The road ahead of him was open, unplanned, unscripted, entirely his own. And for the first time in his life, he was not riding it alone. Because the truth that this story keeps forcing back to the surface is this: there is no shortage of Leos in this world. Young men discarded by systems that were designed to see them and simply chose not to. Men surviving on dignity and stubbornness with no reward in sight, no audience watching, no guarantee that any of it amounts to anything. Most of them never get the morning on the precinct steps. Most of them never get the jacket and the key and the open road. What they get is silence. The question this story keeps asking me is the same one I'm leaving with you now. When is the last time you showed up for someone the world was treating like they were invisible? Because Leo showed up for Jax with absolutely nothing to gain. And 100 men showed up for Leo. That is the whole math of it. You show up for people, and sometimes everything shows up back. What's your take on this? Comment below. I'm reading every single one. If this story hit you, hit the like and send it to someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this, the previous videos are on the channel right now. We'll see you in the next one. End of script. Estimated runtime: 23 to 27 minutes at conversational narration pace.